Thanks very much for joining the webinar and welcome. So this presentation is around grant writing, how to write your grant application. My name's Louise Hayes and I work at the Specialist Centre for Public Health in Newcastle. My colleague Janine Bestall is also on the call and she'll be doing part of the presentation with me. We also have some of our other colleagues on the call. I think Lauren, Charlotte and Helen have joined, who are also part of the team here providing support to people writing grant applications for public health research. And we'll all be around at the end and we'll leave some time for questions. So if you have any questions, we'll be happy to take them. We are recording the session and we will make it available afterwards along with the slides, so don't worry about that. As usual, please keep your mics off if you're not speaking during the presentations. If you don't want to appear on the recording, obviously keep your camera off too. If you do have questions, I can't actually see anybody now, or the chat, I don't think so, but do put them in the chat and other people will monitor the chat while we're talking, and we'll get to those at the end. And I think that was all I was going to say. So without further ado, I think we'll get going. So yeah, the plan for the session is to go over the components of a research application. It's going to be very much a high-level overview of all the bits that go into an application, because really we could do a session on each of the separate components, but it's just to give you that overall idea at this point. We have a pre-recorded session from Peymane Adab, who's recently stood down as chair of the NIHR Public Health Research Programme panel, talking about her reflections on what makes a successful application. I'll then sort of reiterate some of the top tips for success that Peymane's raised, and some of those pitfalls that you want to avoid. And then I'll hand over to Janine, who's going to talk about the Specialist Centre for Public Health and how we can support you with your application. And then we'll leave some time at the end, as I say, for a bit of a Q&A with myself and Janine and some of our colleagues who are methodologists within the Specialist Centre. Okay, so as I say, it's going to be a little bit of a sort of overview, and I've structured this the sort of components around what the NIHR asks you for in their outline application. And obviously all funders have their forms are different, but they generally ask for the same sort of information. So I hope this will be useful, whatever funding you're thinking of going for. But I've just thought, you know, as a way of structuring it, use the NIHR Public Health Research Programme template sort of thing. So these are the things that you'll have to include in your application. So the first thing that everybody sees. I'm assuming that might. Is that someone? I just think I heard someone interrupt, but was that hopefully just mic on unintentionally? If there is anything you want to say, please do put it in the chat and someone will let me know, I hope, because I can't actually see the chat. So yeah, so anyway, so components of the application, the first thing to consider is the plain English summary, although not necessarily the first thing you would write. Then the research plan itself, and within that you'll be expected to include your background and rationale, what the aims and objectives of your research are, your methodology, so your plan for how you're going to do the research, and then depending on the funder, there'll be usually an opportunity to include some uploads, and if it is an NIHR application, and specifically the Public Health Research Programme, you can upload, or you're asked to upload references. That's references that support your background section rather than references about you as a person. A logic model explaining how you think your intervention works, and a flow diagram, which is essentially a sort of Gantt chart about the plan for the study and the timelines and so on. So I'm going to talk a bit more about some of these things, starting with the plain English summary. And this is really important, as it's the bit that everybody reads, and often the first thing that the people reviewing your application will read. So it's your opportunity to get your foot in the door and make your application stand out. So it's really important to make a good first impression. So in the summary, what you're trying to do is convey in a clear and succinct way why your research is important and what you're going to do. So you want to make it easy for the reader to see that it's an important research question and that you're the person and the team that have designed a study that's going to answer it. So what you need to include in the very tight word limit, which will be 3,500 characters if you're going to NIHR Public Health Research, is a background. So what's the problem? Why is it important? Your aim, so what is the question that you want to answer? The design, how are you going to answer it, and why have you chosen that design? Really important how that research, both the question and the design of it has been informed by diverse people and communities, and how you will involve people and communities or the public during the research. And then how are you going to make sure your research is impactful? So how are you going to disseminate your findings? So you need to try and get all that into a very sort of succinct summary. So some of the things to think about are to write for an intelligent but not specialist audience. So and this really is true for the whole application, but the people who initially review your application will be intelligent, educated people, but they won't be specialists in your topic. So you need to make it as plain English as you can. The recommendation is that you use short sentences, which is the suggestion is 15 to 20 words, so not too long. You're using unambiguous language and try to avoid technical jargon as much as possible. And obviously there are some times where you need to use some acronyms or technical type words, and just to try and explain those if you can and make them clear. Do involve your public contributors in developing your plain English summary and reviewing it, because they can be really valuable, or just people that you know who aren't close to the research. It's really good to get them to review it and tell you whether it really is plain English. And there are a lot of resources available to help you, and we at the Specialist Centre for Public Health can help, and we'll say much more about that later. But there are also some online things that you might want to use, and there are some links on the slide to those. So that brings us to, as I sort of hinted at the start, although the plain English summary is kind of the first thing you see, you're probably not going to write that first. That's usually the thing that comes last, but after you've written all the rest, and then you're summarising it nicely. So the main bit of your research is your research plan, which will start with your background and rationale. So you're looking to identify a gap in the evidence, so there's a need for this piece of research, and that, I mean, ideally and often will arise as an observation from your own practice, that you notice there's either something that's needed or something that's happening that's not been evaluated, and there's a need to evaluate. So having sort of identified that gap, then you need to check that it really is a gap. And there are a number of resources, and again, we can help with this, but a number of resources you can use, and some listed there on the slide, to explore what's already been done in this space. So make sure someone's not already doing the project that you're planning to do. And so this is about, in your background section, identifying that gap and then being clear on why it's important that this gap is addressed. So what is the importance of this research question? And then the next thing, which should lead nicely from your background and rationale, will be what your research question is and what your aims and objectives are. So the research question, it should be summarised ideally in a sentence, or you might want to consider using a framework such as the PICO framework, which stands for Population, Intervention, Comparator, Outcome and Study Design. And it's just a way of summarising your research question. And then you need to make sure that your aims and objectives map onto that research question, so it's obvious why they are your aims and objectives and how they will help you to address that question. And then the next, I guess, is the real meat of your research plan, is the methods, the methodology, and how you're going to actually answer that research question. So there's quite a few components of this. The bits that I've highlighted in green on this slide are the ones that I'm going to say a little bit more about in this presentation. But essentially what you need to cover here is your design. So how are you going to do it? So the methods, the timelines for doing that, so and any milestones along the way, how you're going to ensure your study is managed appropriately. You need to talk about how you're going to work in partnership with those affected by your research, so what was previously known as public involvement, how you're going to ensure your research has impact, so how are you going to think through your knowledge mobilisation dissemination plan. You need to cover your research team and why they are the team to deliver this research, and to talk about inclusivity in your research. And I'll say a little bit more about these things in a moment. So just to say that's a lot. If you're applying to PHR, you can include tables, illustrations and graphs and so on to help to communicate some of that information, but they all have to fit within the page limit, so it doesn't give you additional pages, and the limit is 5 pages if it's a public health research outline application. So to say a bit more about some of these things, so all funders, including NIHR, are particularly high value on involving the people and communities who will be impacted by your research in developing it, and it's a condition of receiving funding from NIHR. So there's a lot of support available to you through the Specialist Centre for Public Health, and also some online resources here on the slide. What's important is the public are involved right from the outset, so you're talking to people who potentially are going to be interested or impacted by your research right from the start. So when you're thinking about what your research question should be, you're checking out that that's something that's relevant and resonates with them, that it's an important question to them. And then you continue to involve the public throughout your research project, and you need to be clear in your application how you've done that, and be explicit about how the conversations you've had with people as you were designing the research have impacted on the design. So it's sort of they said, we did type of statements. You want also maybe give some consideration to whether either you or your public contributors or both will require some training to enable you to do the research well, and make sure you've resourced your public involvement or working with your people and communities appropriately. And again, I've put the link there to the NIHR payment guidance on the slide. The next thing I was just going to say a bit about is the research impact. So all funders want to make sure they're funding research that's worthwhile and is going to have an impact if it's successfully completed. So that's something to be thinking about right from the get-go. So thinking at the start how you're going to demonstrate the impact of your research, and be clear on what's going to change as a result of your research. And part of that involves thinking about who needs to be involved in the research and who do you need to be engaging with and communicating with throughout the research process to make sure you're able to realise that impact at the end. And we would encourage you to include that in your application, and be clear in a sort of schematic or a logic model about how that impact's going to be realised. And then the other thing that I was just going to talk about is the research inclusion, which again there's a strong focus on research inclusion, or equality, diversity and inclusion in NIHR, and a condition of funding from them is that you've considered this. So it's important that you've got people from diverse communities shaping your research and contributing to it, as well as making opportunities for participants in your research to come from diverse backgrounds, as well as an emphasis on supporting researchers from diverse backgrounds to become involved in research themselves. And so you need to be clear in your application how you've considered that, and that you've resourced that appropriately throughout your research. And again, a link there to the NIHR guidance on that. And I've just put here a link to the NIHR Research Inclusion Plan, and this sort of graphic demonstrating the different areas in which you might consider research inclusion as part of your application. I think, oh no, I'm just going to summarise that by saying when your application is considered by NIHR or whoever you go to for your funding, these are the things that they think about. So you need to think about the relevance of your research, so demonstrating that it's an important question that needs answering. The quality of your research study design, so demonstrate that your design will answer the question in a robust way. Be thinking about your impact right from the start and demonstrating that you have an appropriate plan for disseminating your work. Involving people and communities is appropriate in your research, both in the design and the delivery. Being mindful of inclusive design of your research. And then things that we've not really touched upon, but they're also considered is the competence of the team, so that demonstrating your team is the best one to deliver the project and has all the people in it with the expertise and experience necessary. And then the final thing is about value for money, so demonstrating that your project is good value for money, so that the amount of money that you're asking for is kind of consistent with the likely impact of the work that you're going to do. And just to say, it's never too early to start planning. It's a real marathon, not a sprint. So it takes a long time to get an application together. And so we would always encourage you to start thinking early. And I think now I have come to the pre-recorded. So this is the part where I'm willing the tech gods to be with me. And I'm just going to stop sharing momentarily if I can. Am I sharing? Please tell me I have been sharing that whole time, because
You were, yeah.
I was. Good. I know, come on, it doesn't look like I am sharing. So I'm now going to try sharing a different screen, which is a pre-recorded session that Peymane Adab has done for us, and I'm hoping this is it. And if someone could tell me if you can see it, that would be great, because I can no longer see.
And I am the co-director.
Are you now seeing that presentation?
We can see it, and Peymane.
Brilliant. I'll make that full screen, and I'm just going. And just to say, so Peymane has recently stood down as chair of the Public Health Research Programme. So she's recorded this for us. She unfortunately couldn't join us live today. So she talks about the remit of the programme, and then talks about her reflections on the things that tend to be make projects successful or not, when they come to the funding panel. So although it's very public health research programme focused, and you might not be thinking you're at the stage where you're thinking of going to them for funding, still the things that she talks about in terms of tips for grant writing are really helpful and will apply to any funder that you go to. So I hope you'll find it useful, and I shall just press play.
Peymane Adab, and I am the co-director of the Midlands satellite for the NIHR RSS Specialist Centre. I'm going to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes talking about the NIHR Public Health Research Funding Programme, hopefully giving you some tips and some of the pitfalls to avoid. And this is based on my experience of having served as a member and a chair of the committee previously. So, the Public Health Research Programme, I think before we get into some tips, it's important to remember what the remit of the programme is. The aim of the programme is to evaluate practical interventions. So before you think about whether it's worth applying there, think about whether your research is about evaluation. Is there an evaluative element to what you're looking at? It funds research that generates evidence to inform the delivery of non-NHS interventions that are expected to improve the health of the public and to reduce inequalities in health. Those words in red are really important to pay attention to. So the programme is looking at evaluation of interventions that are delivered and funded outside of the NHS. So if there is the intervention happens in a community setting or other setting that's not NHS, then it's worth thinking about this programme. There has to be some expected improvement in a measure of health of the public, and there has to be consideration of whether the intervention could reduce or at least not exacerbate inequalities. So the programme funds both primary and secondary research, and there is no upper limit to the amount of funding. I think it's important to remember that as long as the project does demonstrate public health importance, is of high quality, and demonstrates value for money, that there is no limit to the amount of funding. And in the past, projects that have been over £3 million, for example, have been funded. Applications can be made at any time point. There are 3 cut-off dates coinciding with the committee meetings, which happen in February, June, and October each year. So another thing to just bear in mind when you're putting an application together is to think about the process for assessment of applications. When you press the submit button, the first thing that happens is that the secretariat of the committee will look and screen whether the application is in remit and is competitive. Now, most applications will be and will go on to then be assessed in some way. And if you have any doubts about remit, then talking to the secretariat is always helpful. They're very cooperative and always happy to review and discuss whether the application would be in remit and appropriate or not. If it gets through that stage, then the application goes to the prioritisation committee. This committee includes people who work in a service setting, a policy setting, so members of local government or NGOs, as well as members of the public. and others who work in other policy settings, and they look at the application in terms of its public health importance. I think it's really important to remember that they don't see the full application. They look at the plain English summary, the research plan, and the planned intervention, so that other sections are not shared with the prioritisation committee. So in those sections of the application, you need to have sufficient information for the committee to recognise the importance of that project in terms of public health. The other thing that they look at is whether it reduces inequalities in health. So they will always consider the impact on health inequalities. So make sure that this is explicitly discussed within your research plan. So there is a video linked here. It's a short video that's by members of the prioritisation committee, some previous members, and they also provide some information about what they're looking for in that committee, and it's worth having a look at that video. About a third of projects will get rejected at that stage from the priority and don't go forward to the funding committee. But the remainder that do, the stage 1 projects will be reviewed by the funding committee. The PHR process is a 2-stage process, usually for most applications, and so what is submitted is in the stage 1 application is what goes to the prioritisation committee and then on to the funding committee. Again, I've put a link to a video from members of the funding committee, and it's worth watching that to look at what things they value and look for in that committee as well. But the main areas that they focus on in the funding committee is the scientific quality, the feasibility of delivery, and value for money. And at this stage, just over half of projects are usually rejected. So it can be between 55 and 65% that get rejected at this stage. However, once stage 1 applications have been shortlisted, there is quite a good chance of being funded. So 70%, sometimes up to 90% of projects that get to stage 2 do get funded. So do bear that in mind as well. So what are the things that committee members are looking for, and how can we maximise the chances of success and avoid the pitfalls? I'm sorry if this is very obvious, but not everybody does it. So one of the main things to do is to make sure that you've read the guidance notes and the supporting information. If it's a commissioned call that you're responding to, make sure the commissioning brief has been read in detail and thoroughly. Think about the structure of your application and that it's written in a logical and readable format. Remember, the committee have lots of proposals to read. So if you can make your application nicely structured, ordered in a way that's readable, that's going to make it much easier and more likely to go through. There has to be sufficient detail, but not too much. So make sure that you have sufficient detail on all aspects of the application. Avoid acronyms. Nobody likes having multiple acronyms unless it's a really common one. And ensure that you have and you can demonstrate support from relevant stakeholders. Have you consulted members of the public and other relevant stakeholders? If it's appropriate, are they on your research team? And what is the impact that your research will have on those groups? So make sure that is done in plenty of time before the application is submitted, so that you have meaningful input from the stakeholders. And also, I've just reminded that the RSS Specialist Centre for Public Health is there and worth consulting if you have any questions. So just in a bit more detail, I think first point is to think about the intervention, innovation, or initiative that is to be evaluated. Think about real world problems. and identify what the rationale is for this proposal, and what's the existing evidence around it. There needs to be, in the background section, a demonstration of an evidence gap. Also, what is the theoretical underpinning of the intervention to achieve the outcomes that are being hoped to be demonstrated? The PHR committee expects almost every application to have a logic model. So think about that. What is the logic or the theory that underpins that intervention pathway to the outcomes that you're expecting to look at? For systematic reviews or evidence syntheses, there needs to have been some scoping review undertaken that demonstrates some detail on the size of the available literature base and that it would be feasible for the review to go ahead. In primary research, there needs to be detail of any pilot work or previous work that's been done, and if there is insufficient evidence from preliminary studies, then it's worth always thinking about whether a feasibility study is the first step, and that should be included within the application. If it's a feasibility study that's being proposed, then make sure that there are sufficient and sensible stop-go criteria, and also demonstrate that a further follow-on study would be feasible. So some estimate of the sample size of a follow-on study helps to demonstrate that it's reasonable to go ahead with a feasibility study. The other point is to think about a systems perspective. Increasingly, prevention science is expecting that systems focus to be there. There has been a dominance of individual level research, and the PHR programme is increasingly moving away from funding individual level interventions and much more looking at policy level or population level interventions, or interventions that tackle upstream determinants of health. So be very wary of whether your intervention is scalable and expandable, and does it tackle something that's further upstream than an individual level behaviour change. It's also really important to clearly describe the intervention succinctly but clearly. Justify why that particular intervention is being tested rather than any alternatives, and also what the comparator is. There has to be some sort of comparator for the evaluation to be meaningful. Carefully consider what the outcomes are. So what is the primary outcome measure? This should always be health related. There needs to be a clear health related outcome measure, unless in some circumstances the commissioning brief specifies otherwise. But otherwise, if that is not in the commissioning brief, or if it's a researcher-led proposal, then a health-related primary outcome is going to be needed. When it comes to describing recruitment, make sure that that's got described in sufficient detail, and justify how you intend to recruit, and also potential retention and attrition rates and how these could be addressed. So if you are aware of limitations, talk about them explicitly and discuss what the implications would be or how you would attempt to mitigate. In terms of the methodology, make sure that, again, there is sufficient detail, and justify why the particular methods are chosen over any other potential methodology. There is a move away from randomized controlled trials in public health research, but many of the research proposals do include RCTs. Nevertheless, it's often impossible to do an RCT, and so natural experiment designs, and refer to the recent guidance on natural experiment designs, modelling studies, and so on, are increasingly being used. So if those other methods are being used, please make sure that you refer to guidance and guidelines on how to report them, and that there is sufficient detail for the reviewers to be able to assess whether it's feasible or not. So if it, and similarly for qualitative methods or realist methods, there needs to be sufficient detail on the rationale, the design, the methods for it to be assessed. The next area that reviewers are going to be focusing on is the project team. PHR projects expect multidisciplinary teams with appropriate skills and expertise. So that means make sure that you include not just subject experts, but methodologists, practitioners if appropriate, and also members of the public in the team. There is almost always an economic element in the evaluations expected, and if no health economic element is included, that needs to be justified. But it's not unusual for PHR project teams to be 10 to 15 or sometimes even more members, depending on the skill and expertise that's needed for the project. So do make sure that you think about the full needs of the team. The committee also look for value for money. Are the costs reasonable and commensurate with the proposed work? So, you know, if you have an expensive feasibility study that includes a handful of people, it's unlikely to be considered to be worthwhile in terms of value for money. And are the costs to services reasonable in relation to the likely benefits that might be coming out of it? So those are the areas that are looked at in terms of value for money. Finally, the scientific rigor of the proposal will be assessed to look at whether the design proposed would answer the proposed research questions, would the study be feasible and deliverable, and does the team have the necessary skill mix and experience? Finally, there is a look at whether the project management plan is sound as well. Don't forget pathways to impact. The committee are asked to look at this, and they will comment on whether the pathways to impact is sufficiently described. Who are the people who are going to be interested in the answer to the research question? How have they been engaged? And what will happen once the research is completed? So make sure that you give some thought to that aspect as well. So a lot of that detail goes into the stage 1 proposal, and if your application is successful and gets invited and shortlisted for a stage 2, there will be feedback on the stage 1 proposal. In addition, at stage 2, in addition to the committee's comments, you will get feedback from a set of reviewers. So between 3 and 6 reviewers will have had a look at the stage 2 application, and you will have the opportunity to respond. Sorry, that at the stage 1 proposal, you will get just the committee response, but at stage 2, you will get, in addition, reviewer responses. In either of those 2 stages, make sure that you respond to every single point that the reviewers have made. A common problem is that feedback is ignored or just buried, and the committee do pick up on that. Even if you disagree with the committee, that's fine. Just respond respectfully and explain why it's not appropriate, but don't ignore the comments. So just to summarize, I think this is a summary of what I've already said. The things that make a strong application then, or where applicants have a strong track record in applied health research, so the team has the track record. There is appropriate methodological and clinical expertise where appropriate. The question is focused and addresses an important research area with likelihood of public benefit, that should say. That the project is ambitious but not over-ambitious. The proposal is deliverable, and there is meaningful public involvement. Also, if it's well written and the objectives are linked to the planned methods and it's well planned and clearly presented, that makes it much easier to read and easier to review and is more likely to be successful. A weak application, on the other hand, fails to demonstrate the importance of the topic, to demonstrate the likelihood of public benefit, may lack appropriate expertise in and involvement of the right skill mix, or there may be lack or inappropriate public involvement. And the committee do have public members and they comment on every proposal. So there is definite scrutiny of that element. The other area where weakness is sometimes seen is where the time allocated to the applicants is not sufficient. So if it doesn't look like, for example, the health economist has sufficient time allocated, or the PI is only having 5% time allocated, that's unlikely to be a successful project, and that will be picked up. If there's lack of detail in terms of the research methods, or the proposal is unfocused or overambitious, then those are also picked up. And often these things happen when a proposal is submitted too soon and not sufficient time has been put into the preparation. I would say it's best to delay submission and put more thought into it than to rush to get to a deadline. So that's the end of my slides, and I hope that's helpful. Very happy to be contacted if there was any, I think through the Specialist Centre, if there were any queries. Thank you.
Oh, so I hope that was helpful to you, and I'm just going to try and go back to sharing my own slides now, which I can't see. Oh, sorry, I'm starting this. Sorry, 2 seconds while I get back to our slides. I'm not so sorry. I've now got him to have gone to just find the right place where we're up to in these slides. Share and hope that you see this. Are you seeing the full screen slides now, or
not yet, not in presenter mode.
I'll just try here, see if this works. Sorry, I knew this would prove tricky. Now has it gone to presenter mode?
It has, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I hope that was useful from Peymane, and I'll pass on her thanks for that. I was just going to very quickly, I'm conscious of the time, and Janine's going to talk to you a little bit about what we can do at the Specialist Centre for Public Health, and hopefully leave a few minutes for some questions at the end as well. But just to run over, and I think I'll be reiterating very much what Peymane said in her talk, but our top tips are, so when you're writing your application, write it clearly for a non-expert audience. As I said at the start, make sure your summary is plain English and grabs the reader's attention. Be really clear on the importance of your research and the potential for it to have impact. Demonstrate that you're aware of other related work in the area, so make sure that it's clear to the people reviewing that you're aware of other work that's going on, that you're familiar with the topic. Cover all aspects of your research design in your application and justify why you've chosen that design. Be sure to make clear how your work maps onto your aims and your anticipated outcomes, and be consistent throughout. So this is about making sure it's professionally and sort of a polished application. So they hate to see it where there's inconsistencies, particularly where it's things like sample size, where in one point you say, well, we'll recruit 50 people, and somewhere else it says 60. That just looks like unprofessional and like a poor attention to detail. Other tips are then, I think we've said this quite a lot now, but be clear how public involvement has shaped your research and how you're going to continue to involve the public. Think about how you're making your research inclusive. Again, thinking about your pathway to impact. get a lot of feedback throughout the process of drafting. So draft and redraft, share drafts early on, including with your public representatives. And all this takes time. So make sure you have allowed yourself lots of time and make use of the support available. And more of that coming in a minute from Janine. I'll just finish off with the pitfalls. So yeah, they don't like to see a non-professional application. If you're asking a panel to give money to you to do some research, they want you to look professional and a good attention to detail and so on. And so the opposite of what I said previously as well, if there's a lack of awareness of existing work on the topic, that looks like you've underprepared. So try to make sure you avoid that. If it's not clear on why the research is needed, so you haven't really made that case for the importance. I think this is something that also came out with Peymane, the need to, where it's not over ambitious, so being realistic about the deliverability, that it's going to be feasible to do the research that you're planning. If it looks like the research design isn't going to answer the question robustly, so take advice, make sure you've got the right design for the research, and the issue about inconsistencies, which I think I've mentioned. They don't like to see lack of clarity around how you're going to do things, so be clear about how you're going to recruit people, justify recruitment rates and so on, be clear about that you've got access to the populations you want to get to. They don't like tokenistic involvement of the public, so again we've said a lot now about being clear how you're involving them. Lack of consideration of research inclusion. And something else Peymane talked about, but gaps in expertise or experience on your team. So they want to see a team that's got the experience, so that multidisciplinary team is usually needed with people who have got the track record in there to demonstrate their ability to deliver that research. Thinking again about your impact, making sure the potential of your impact is clear, and they don't want to see that it's poor value for money. Again, things we've already talked about. So I'm now finally, sorry Janine, going to hand over to you for how the Specialist Centre for Public Health can help you. I go straight to the next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. So just in the last 3 to 5 minutes, I'm just going to talk about the support from the Research Support Service. So the Research Support Service offers free and confidential support to researchers from all backgrounds and organisations in health and social care. We really are here to help. The RSS offers a core national service delivered by 8 hubs. 4 of them offer specialist services, 2 in social care in Lancaster and York, 2 in public health in Newcastle and Southampton. Each hub is a partnership of research groups, organisations and clinical trials units with methodological expertise in applied health and social care research, and lots of expertise in applying for funding. Next slide, please. Our Research Support Service Specialist Centre for Public Health is one national centre provided by 2 organisations, Newcastle and Partners and Southampton and Partners. There are 3 pillars across the centres. So we support people around governance, ethics and training, looking at webinars like this and hoping to offer more in future. We support and enable increased capacity and capability in public health research. So some of you will be familiar with the LAP posts, and there is also public involvement funding to get things off the ground and to do some of that early work with public and communities, people and communities. Louise and I lead a team of methodologists supporting people developing applications for research funding. So we work with anyone at any stage of their career, whether you're new to research or whether you're more experienced and have applied before. We're happy to talk to you. We provide advice to those developing proposals for public health research, and it's in non-NHS settings. So the generic RSS will support people applying to the NHS for research in NHS settings, because there's lots of funding for that. And we do support people applying for fellowships from the NIHR Academy, and we can take a bit of longer time sort of working with people with those. So they might take a year or more perhaps to get to the finish line. Next slide, please. So how can we help you? I don't know if I need to cover all of this because it's all been covered in the presentation, but we can help you in all the things that we've talked about today, right from setting the research question, right through to responding to feedback at stage 2. So I think we've covered pretty much all of this, so I won't go over it again. Next slide, please. What can you expect? So please do come to us. We've been set up so that we can support people through the process, which, as Louise said, it is a marathon, not a sprint. Submit an inquiry to us using the form. you only have to add your details, brief information about your project. It can be as little as a research question or just an idea. We're happy to talk to people. One of the things we do is we talk to people about if it's not right. So we don't want you to waste your time. So we'll point you in the right direction in terms of whether it's going to go through or not, or whether you need to think about other things. A member of our team will schedule a consultation with you, and then you'll have a friendly discussion hosted on Teams or Zoom, and we tailor support to your needs. So you can have one consultation, or you might choose to have more of a sort of coaching relationship with us, depending on what it is. Some people have support through their local authorities or through other mechanisms. So yeah, it's very friendly. Please do get in contact with us. So I think the next slide is our contact details. So please do get in touch with myself and Louise if you have questions, or contact the centre on either of those links. And I think we're happy to take questions now.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Janine. I'll stop sharing so I can see the chat, because I'm finding it all very disconcerting. There we go.
That sounds good.
Yeah, so we're very happy to take any questions. If anyone has them, please just either put them in the chat or raise hands, or just shout, switch your mic on and call out if we maybe can't see everybody's hand. And I know somebody had asked already about pre-award funding for public involvement or community engagement, and we are able to help with that. If you're in contact with us and we're supporting you to develop your research plan and application, we can give you access to what's called a PIA, which is I'm going to not remember the acronym, Public Involvement and Engagement Resource, PIA, and you can apply for funding of up to £600 to do some of that early work with public contributors, so to remunerate them for their time, and the NIHR guidance is that you would pay £25 per hour for people to be involved in that. And so it might be for that, or it might be to provide refreshments or travel expenses, depending if you were holding an in-person meeting. But we just it's a relatively short form that will be assessed by members of our team and some of our public representatives as well. And usually the funding is awarded in honesty. Maybe there's sometimes a little bit of to-ing and fro-ing just to sort of fine-tune what you're proposing to do. But yeah. We've just seen the question about Wales. I'm sorry, we're not. Our remit is only for England, which we do keep reporting back to NIHR is problematic. The sort of way around it is we're very happy to work with you if you've got a collaborator that's in England. So that's quite often the case, that we have supported people from Wales or Scotland and Northern Ireland, indeed, if they're working with somebody in an English local authority or an English university or other organisation, but strictly speaking, our remit is only for England. So apologies for that. Are there any other questions? I think have we done information overload, maybe?
I think the only other thing was whether the presentation had been sent out, and I think we
Okay.
we are, yeah.
Yes, we will circulate the slides and the recording. This is being recorded at the moment, so that will be circulated to everyone that signed up. I think I'm right in saying, Alex. I'm sure that's the case. Alex has just appeared. Did you want to say something, Alex? Just show it your face. Okay. Okay, well, I think if there are no questions, I'll just thanks very much for your attention, and we encourage you to come and talk to us if you've got ideas about research at all. And please don't think we're only supporting people who are going for the big grants that are going to public health research. We're really happy to speak to whatever stage you're at. So even if you're just thinking about putting your toe in the water, you're just starting to think about what research is, we'd be really happy to have a conversation with you about how we can support that. So please do contact us. And as Janine said, we're really very friendly. Charlotte's got a camera on now as well, so you might get to speak to one of us, or there's, I think we're a team of about 14 now supporting the research design. So we'll be very happy to speak to you. So do get in touch. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.